Susan X. Maher here, reading from my latest novel, Mosaic. This one is set in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, current day. Chapter 1. Kelsey Malyar piloted her car along marginally familiar streets, annoyed with herself for having neither juice in her phone nor a charging cable within reach. She was sure she would have been able to find this factory in no time if her car had GPS, but it had not only been built before GPS was a common option, she had purposefully bought the most stripped-down car she could find. Expensive options were just unnecessary things that started to feel necessary the minute they broke. The streets in this once heavily industrial, now hipster-influenced part of Lawrenceville were not particularly gorgeous, now made even more homely by the dirty snow. They'd been surprised by an early November storm just a couple of days ago, and the temps had been cold enough to keep the snowy dregs around, making everything look kind of filthy. Despite having lived in Pittsburgh her entire life, she was often surprised by little snippets of entire neighborhoods or just individual streets she was sure she had never traveled on. Sometimes she loved the feeling of discovering something new in a place she thought she was completely familiar with, but today that love was entirely missing, all because of that dead phone. She'd spent a decent amount of time in Lawrenceville, patronizing the Neapolitan pizza joints, craft beer emporiums, and farm-to-table restaurants that made you feel like you'd broken the law by eating an artichoke grown in another state. But the places she'd visited had been in the 30s or 40s. Up here in the 50s, the vibe was hipster-adjacent rather than full-on $11 beers. 10 blocks could be a big difference in Pittsburgh. Continuing to creep up the street, she briefly thought of what this area would have looked like 100 years earlier. She wasn't sure if any of her ancestors had ever lived in this specific neighborhood, but Upper Lawrenceville had been filled with her people, immigrants who only knew how to work hard for subsistence wages, and long as they kept their complaints to themselves. What would her great-grandparents say if they witnessed a couple paying $18 for a pizza that barely filled them? She laughed at the image, assuming they would tell the hipsters they were as dumb as rocks. The address of the factory was stuck to her dash with a sticky note, and she took a look to double-check once she spotted the proper street. They were very close to the river here, which made the streets short. At the end of the block was a nondescript, hulking brick building, probably once some kind of foundry or maybe a heavy manufacturing plant, albeit a small one. Someone had told her that one of the biggest blast furnaces had been in this part of Lawrenceville, and if that was true, all kinds of smaller businesses would have sprung up to provide tools and dyes and other pieces of machinery too inconsequential for the big guys to bother with. Back then, these smaller factories would have been chock-a-block to the modest two-story homes that still line the streets. It must have been a noisy, stinking mess, with all kinds of crud spewing out of a factory 2 feet from your bedroom window. How bad must things have been in Slovakia to make industrial Pittsburgh seem like the promised land? The faded red brick building sported a loading dock on one side and a tiny parking strip on the other that was full of cars, probably belonging to the workers. This didn't look like the kind of spot that customers routinely visited. Kelsey had to turn around and head back toward Butler to stow her car. Then she got out, careful to avoid the broken sidewalk and puddles of slushy mess that the cold sun had created. When she reached the facade of the building, she saw a spiffy metal sign stating the address and street number, which surprisingly improved the look of the building by about 100%. Below the address, Pittsburgh's Finest had been rendered in tile, each foot-tall letter framed in what appeared to be, but probably wasn't, rusted metal. Below that big, blocky, industrial-looking name, a curvy handwriting font that might have been hand-painted on the metal added the legend, "Handcrafted Tile." That was a very nice touch, hinting at Pittsburgh's brawny nature, along with the delicate hand needed to craft unique tile. Whoever had bothered with the time and expense to create the sign for a building that probably got very few customers was a nitpicker. Since she loved to pick nits herself, she was feeling good as she approached the front door, absolutely sure of one thing: this stuff was going to be expensive. Kelsey opened the heavy wooden door with the decorative glass insert, hearing a tinkling bell above her head. The reception area was nearly at the doorway, where a woman wrapped in a heavy sweater, along with a wool scarf looped around her neck, sat. Kelsey closed the door quietly, saying, "I bet you love it when people stand in the open door for a minute or two, right?" "If I had a gun." The woman smiled, and Kelsey did what she always did when she was face to face with a pretty woman. She tried to guess her particulars. This specimen woman was super young, early 20s, more likely than not. She was probably straight, but to Kelsey's practiced eye, maybe not too straight. The graceful, airy tattoo that sat right under her ear showed she also wasn't too staid. She looked a little arty, with that spiky haircut that showed off her angular bone structure. Her hair was probably originally brown, but had been dyed the silver color that a lot of young women were into at the moment. All in all, her image was easily nice enough to ponder for more than a moment, but business called. "Hi there," Kelsey said. "I'm from Sedlak Brothers." The woman gave her a blank but pleasant look. The home improvement store over in Breezy Point?" Kelsey added, still getting nothing. "Anyway, we're kitchen and bath designers. I've got a client who doesn't like any of the tile we currently carry. I thought I might be able to find something here that would impress her." Now the woman brightened. "Well, if we don't have what you want, we'll make it," she said confidently. "Are you talking about a single kitchen?" "A single house," she clarified. "Kitchen, entryway, 4 bathrooms, and a fireplace surround. But I'm also open to the idea of putting your supplies in our showroom." She tried not to look too full of herself. "I make the decisions about what we carry in the store." Her co-workers weren't crazy about that, but Kelsey was damned happy to be the favorite, and she wasn't about to give up her slot. The woman looked down at her desk, and Kelsey followed her gaze. When a white light on the multi-line phone dimmed, she pressed a button. "Hi, boss. Do you have a minute to talk to someone about having some tile made?" She nodded a few times. "Uh-huh, I think so." She looked up at Kelsey, studying her for a minute. "Mm-hmm, right. Yeah, we'll be here." She hung up and smiled brightly. "Summer will be here in just a minute." "I wish," Kelsey said, rubbing her arms to show she was making a joke about the weather. But the woman gave her another blank look, her IQ not seeming to match her striking looks. Kelsey looked to her right when she heard footsteps coming down the hallway. It was turning out to be a surprisingly good day at the tile store. Summer was aptly named, appearing like a warm splash of sunshine on an otherwise gray day. Kelsey was a little tongue-tied as she looked at her, barely noticing her fair hair and brownish eyes, amazed that someone could throw off so much warmth with just a smile. "Hi there," she said, extending her hand for a firm shake. "Summer Hayes. What can I do for you?" "Summer Hayes? Cool name. Hippie parents?" She narrowed her gaze for a moment. Oh, you're picturing it spelled Haze. She nodded. Sadly, it's the standard Hayes, but I might change it. I'd like to make it a little more funky. Well, I must be longing for the hazy days of summer. I'm Kelsey Maliar, the lead kitchen designer over at Sedlak Brothers in... Really? She leaned against the reception area's short wall for a second, then put her hands behind herself and boosted her butt up to sit upon it, her booted feet dangling like a child's. I tried to get you guys to carry my product line when I was just starting out. Bupkis, she said, flicking her fingers in the air. When was that? About... She closed her eyes slightly. 10 years ago, give or take. I talked to a pretty old guy named Junior. Kelsey nodded. Yeah, John Jr. was in charge until about 8 years ago. Well, he had absolutely no interest in my work. Her smile grew a little brighter. He told me his customers were looking for cheap and cheerful, and my stuff was neither. Kind of harsh, Kelsey said. But our management, as well as our clients, have changed in the last few years. We're doing more historic renovations now, and cheap and cheerful does not cut it with that crowd. She leaned toward Kelsey slightly as a surprisingly flirty smile made her entire face light up. You're offering what? Do you want to become an authorized retailer after kicking me to the curb when I really needed the work? Kelsey rocked back on her heels for a second, then Summer let out a laugh. Kidding, she said, reaching up to tuck her surprisingly long hair back over her shoulder. Kelsey watched her closely, now enthralled by the color and texture of her hair, obviously a natural pale blonde. What must it have been like to have such a rare color? Probably kind of freaky. Guys must have hit on her relentlessly, which had to be a pain in the butt. I assume you have one customer you can't please with your current lineup. I'm right, aren't I? Once again, caught off guard, Kelsey said, oh, yeah, that's true, but it's a good customer. And if I can find something that strikes me, I really do have the authority to decide to carry your line. Summer looked her over, clearly trying to decide if Kelsey merited her time. She should have kept her mouth shut, but Kelsey found herself rattling on. If I can make this very particular client happy, she'll be my biggest sale ever. Deadpan, Summer said, God knows I want you both to be happy. She twisted around on the counter to reach the desk, giving Kelsey another chance to check her out. She was dressed professionally, but not formally. Her boots, one of which was way off the ground as she squirmed around trying to pick up what must have been a heavy book, were really cool. Mostly brown leather, with a bit of dark brown suede on the sides. Her mid-brown jeans looked really good with the boots, not to mention how they showed off her butt, which was worth a very long look. But Kelsey sternly reminded herself she was working, not scoping out a woman in a club. She removed her gaze from Summer's butt and limited her appreciation to the forest green blouse decorated with white ivy. She never thought to wear a pressed blouse to work, but this one looked awfully nice. Those cute boots tapped at the wall as Summer balanced a trifold sample book on her thighs. Take a look at our standard line for this year. Most of these are in stock and ready for delivery. Oh, I can stop you right there, Kelsey said, not bothering to even take a peek. My client wants something she can't get anywhere else, and I do mean anywhere. Really? Summer raised an eyebrow, which was a particularly nice one. Not too thick and several shades darker than her hair. Does your client have any idea of what she'll have to pay for true custom tile? She might, but I can guarantee there isn't a number that will be too large. Her goal seems to be to spend more money on renovating her house than any of her friends or neighbors. Summer slapped the heavy book closed. "Come into my office, Kelsey. I'll put everything on hold to nab a custom job." As they started to walk, Summer turned back to the reception area. "Hold my calls, Chelsea." "All of them?" Summer laughed. "Just ones about jobs smaller than this one." Summer was really too busy to spend time talking to a rando off the street. But this rando was probably gay, definitely cute, and seemed like fun. One of the biggest perks of owning your own business was being able to have fun when the opportunity arose, and Summer tried to indulge herself whenever possible. Of course, the bills needed to be paid, and if Kelsey had just wanted to buy stock tiles, she'd be sitting in the lounge looking at their sample books by now. Pittsburgh's finest did a lot of custom work, but most of that was for institutional or commercial settings. Residential customers were just getting on the bandwagon of making a unique, lasting addition to their homes, something future generations could admire. In her biased opinion, a custom fireplace surround or an entryway floor was the best way to leave your mark. Granted, it was an expensive mark, but quality had never been cheap. She let Kelsey pass in front of her when they reached the office. "Can I get you a coffee? Tea? We've got a huge selection." Kelsey pulled one of the chairs out and sat, then looked up with a thoughtful expression. "I would actually love a cup of tea. Do you have Irish breakfast? That's my favorite." "Do I have Irish breakfast?" Summer said, rolling her eyes. "This is the big leagues. I'll be back in a flash." Their break room was at the end of the hall, and Summer smiled to herself when two of her glazers jumped up and made for the exit to the production area the second she entered. She checked the clock, seeing it was 10:40. The floor supervisor usually called for breaks at 10 and 3, so the glazers had probably been dawdling. But she wouldn't say anything, unless it became chronic. Some days you just needed to chill with a friend. It took a while to get everything in order, then she added a few butter cookies to the tray and carried it all back to her office. When she entered, Kelsey gawped at her like she'd carved a swan out of ice. "You made a pot of tea?" Yeah, it's easier than carrying hot liquid in a cardboard box. I've tried." No, she said, smiling gently. "I've just never had anyone make a whole pot for me. I usually get a tea bag along with lukewarm water in a mug." Summer set the tray on a small round table between the chairs and sat down. "This is a first-class concern, Kelsey." She laughed a little. "I was going to use your last name to sound even more stilted, but I've forgotten it already." "Maliar." She poured the tea into a cup, then offered it to Kelsey. "Help yourself to the add-ins." While she poured her own, she said, "Is your name Ukrainian?" "Slovak. Actually, it should be Maliarova, but once we got to America, we stopped feminizing it." "Well, I'm not second-guessing you, but Maliarova has a better rhythm. It's not too late to change, you know. Tell you what, I'll change mine to Haze, and we can go to City Hall to file the paperwork together." Kelsey took the teasing well, smiling and nodding like she was going to get right on that project. After stirring her milk in, she took a sip. "Oh, boy, that's good. My grandmother would love this, rest her soul. She complained constantly about not being able to get a good cup of tea in America." "Oh, the Slovaks are big tea drinkers?" "Actually, I don't know any real Slovaks. From Slovakia, I mean. So I can't guess about their affinity for tea. I'm talking about my maternal grandmother, first-generation Irish-American, and tea addict." "Ah, never argue with an addict." Reaching across her desk, Summer pulled her tablet over and opened it to the photos of the custom tiles they'd done in the last couple of years. "Are you ready to look at some of our work?" "Absolutely." Summer homed in on some of her favorites, tiles they'd done for a patron lounge at Heinz Hall. "I love these," she said. "Every instrument in the orchestra is represented, jet black on a pure white background." She let her stylist hover over the outline of a clarinet. "This shows the level of detail we can create." "I can see each key," Kelsey said quietly. "I know, it looks fantastic in the room. But the important thing is that this was exactly what they were looking for. It reflects the orchestra's essence, right?" "Right." She touched the edge of the tablet. "Mind if I page through?" "No, go right ahead. You'll see it's mostly commercial, but there are a few residential installations in there. People love our tiles for the craftsman-style homes they've been snapping up." "That's exactly what my clients have," Kelsey said, leaning over to really study the tiles as she flipped through. Summer was watching to see what interested her, but she wasn't focusing as closely as she probably should have been. It wasn't every day or every month that a nice-looking lesbian popped into her office. She wasn't even sure how she knew Kelsey was gay, but she would have eaten her rainbow flag if she wasn't. It was hard to tell a lot about a person in November when everyone wore fluffy down coats, but Kelsey had shrugged out of hers while Summer had been brewing tea, revealing enough of herself to keep Summer busy for a minute. First, she checked her left hand, pleased to see no wedding ring. Same-sex marriage had been awesome for many reasons, but a small side benefit was that you could cross a woman off your list quickly if she wore a ring. Kelsey's dark hair had a little wave to it, and it looked really nice against her red sweater. She took good care of her nails, which Summer appreciated, but she kept them the lesbian-approved length, long enough to show that she didn't bite them, short enough to not injure a partner. Now that they were sitting close to one another, she could see that Kelsey's legs were a little longer than her own, confirming her guess that she was a bit taller. So far, there wasn't a thing about her that made Summer dread having to work with her, and there were quite a few things that made her consider asking her out once their business was settled. That would be a first, but after running the shop for 10 years, she didn't mind taking a few risks. "Pardon?" Summer said when she realized she'd been daydreaming. "I asked about color. I assume you can do just about anything." "Oh, sure. Anything your fertile imagination can come up with. But nearly everyone wants something in green, rust, tan, or muted orange. If the house is filled with oak, natural earthy colors usually looks best." Kelsey let out a sigh. "My client wants to update the house, which means she's going to paint most of the wood." Summer had to clench her hands into fists to stop herself from grabbing Kelsey and shaking her. After making sure she could control her voice, she said, "They're painting the original wood? The pristine oak that's been unmolested for over 100 years? Uh-huh." She looked down, thankfully showing the shame she should have been filled with. "I just do the technical layout of the kitchen and baths. My client's interior designer is the one who has convinced her to go with mostly white walls with royal blue and slate gray accents. No unfinished wood." "Philistine," Summer grumbled. "If I wasn't saving for an upcoming trip to Portugal, I would turn this job down. But I really could use a nice big boost to my vacation fund, so I'm going to throw away my strongly held beliefs for a couple of bucks." She let out a laugh. "I guess it's not as bad as cutting down the rainforest, but I wish to hell there was a law that prevented people from screwing up historic homes." "Oh, I do too. I really tried to talk the homeowner into keeping at least the dining room original, but she's even going to take out the built-in break front. I assume they'll sell that for a bag of cash. Or chop it up and throw it into a landfill," Summer said, her voice taking on a dark tone. She took the tablet back, slugged the rest of her tea down, and got up to return to her side of the desk. I assume your client will want some ostentatious family crest they make up on the fly. I don't think they have one of those, but... She paused and swallowed noticeably. She's mentioned including her dogs in some way. I've been hoping she means just their initials or something. Summer picked up her stylus and started to draw, coming up with what she thought was a pretty good representation of a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. Something like this. How did you know? I knew because they're hugely popular right now. Some super famous influencer must have a couple of them. Kelsey rested her head on the edge of the desk and thumped it softly against the wood. Sometimes I can't stand the people who make it possible to pay my rent. Roger that. But I'm sure people 1 or 2 rungs below us on the income distribution graph think we suck too. Most likely. She sat up straight and settled her hair. So, you can go modern on the tiles? Yes, we can honestly do just about anything. I've done tiles that look like leather, wood, metal. Just advise your client that having a custom color isn't much more expensive than our standard ones. It's when we have to paint dogs' faces on them that the price skyrockets. I'll talk to the designer. I don't like his aesthetic, but he understands how to rein a budget in if he needs to. She revealed a wry smile. So far, my client is trusting him to keep an eye on costs. Have you ever heard anything stupider? Summer laughed, glad to hear that Kelsey seemed to have a good grip on reality. That's like having a pastry chef as your dietitian. But I'm constantly surprised at how cavalier people are about blowing wads of money. Yeah, I'm not sure what the opposite of cavalier is, but that's where I am when it comes to spending wads of money. Well, that's because you work for a living. She started to stand. Even though your client sounds like a dope, I hope we can do business together. Kelsey stood and extended her hand. I do too. Even if the only thing I get out of this is a tour of your shop, I'm kind of fascinated by tile. Are you then? Summer spent a moment giving Kelsey as long a glance as she could manage without seeming rude. The fact that she stood stock still, with only her smile growing wider, showed that she didn't mind another woman checking her out, albeit politely. After looking at the clock and realizing she wouldn't be ruining her day to blow a little time, Summer said, let's go take a look right now. We don't get many visitors, but my crew seems to like it when I boast about them. Now? Right now? She took a look at her watch, seeming to be wrestling with her conscience about spending more time away from the office. Oh, what the heck. I don't have anything scheduled for an hour. Well, if you're going to play hooky, you might as well be doing something interesting. And if you like tile... Summer led the way down the hall, then pushed open a heavy fire door, revealing the production floor. Damn! Do you make all the tile in the world? You know, some days it feels like it, but we're probably about 0.1% of the U.S. market. Wow, Kelsey said, letting her gaze slowly move across the room. The building itself was 2 stories, and she'd assumed that the company was spread out over 2 floors. But this part of the building was a single floor with a double-height ceiling. Tall windows ringed 3 sides, probably original, with thin muntins creating so many panes she didn't bother counting them. Another set of windows was just about head height, and they opened to let in a fresh breeze. But even the cold air coming in did not cool the space down much. A series of kilns along the back wall were probably all cranking, allowing the workers to get away with wearing tank tops and t-shirts in November. There were 3 loading doors at the far end, and they were currently closed. But Kelsey could see how handy they'd be, allowing a truck to pull right into the building to be loaded up with boxes. Even with all the fresh air, the place still smelled heavily of clay, which was surprisingly appealing. Of course, since clay was mostly earth, it should have smelled good. Don't you love that scent? Summer said, looking supremely happy. If I'm in a bad mood, I come in here first thing and just walk around smelling the place. It always cheers me up. I can see that, Kelsey said. But haven't I read that clay's dangerous? Summer smiled with a sparkle to her eyes that let Kelsey know she was going to say something smart-alecky. I don't know you well enough to know what you've read, but we've got more industrial caliber air cleaners than OSHA requires. Plus, we have the floor washed every night. That keeps us from walking on pieces that have dropped to the floor and hardened. It's just the dust that's dangerous. Something wet nudged her hand, and Kelsey yanked it back to grasp it before looking down to see a skinny black dog with just one brown eye peering up at her, grinning. I almost wet my pants. Summer squatted down and let the dog lick her face. Did Tuffy scare you? He wouldn't hurt a fly. Well, he only scared me because I wasn't expecting a dog in a factory. My mind started spinning, trying to think of what had a big enough tongue to reach my hand. Summer's smirk made Kelsey think she was going to say something racy, but she contained herself. When she stood, she pointed across the room at a burly guy in a sleeveless t-shirt. See that guy with the black beard and the clay residue up to his elbows? He rescued Tuffy when he was a pup. That was just after they removed his eye. Aw, poor pup. Yeah, I'm sure Tuffy would prefer to have a pair, but he's got a good life. Henry was worried about leaving him alone when he was getting used to his new perspective. So we took a vote and unanimously agreed he could bring him to work until he wasn't running into walls. She stood up and scratched the dog's shiny black coat. That was 7 years ago, and he thinks he works here now. I had no idea this small building contains so many employees. They're everywhere. And they're all trying to figure out who you are, Summer said quietly. Like I said, we don't get many visitors. Kelsey started to count, but Summer saved her the trouble. I've got 20, and I might want to hire another, even though my crew isn't in favor of that. Do you take votes on everything? Oh, God, no. But we're a little short every day and seriously short once in a while. I asked the finishers if they wanted a small raise or more help, and they all wanted the cash. She shrugged. I'm willing to try that, but I can't afford to get behind. This is not a democracy. Kelsey turned in a circle to check everything out. I see lots of machines and things I can't name. Let me introduce you around. Great. Hey, Paco, Summer said, walking over to a guy and putting her hand on his shoulder after he'd set down a big block of clay. How many did you cut today? He was a short, stocky guy who looked like he'd win a wrestling match against all comers. Bristly hair, golden tan skin, and dark, alert eyes. Well, I didn't get started hand cutting until I finished that other job. He scratched at his head with his clay-flecked fingers. Got about 100 on the drying racks, but don't worry, I'll finish by tomorrow. I'm not worried, Summer said. I'm just checking to make sure we're on schedule. You know I'd tell you if we weren't, he said, with his voice dropping down into a deeper tone. I'm just trying to look like I'm in charge, she said, laughing. I want to show off in front of a client. Oh! He threw his head back and laughed with his round belly jiggling. Why didn't you say so? I can play stupid. Oh, you'd fail at that, buddy. We'll just watch you for a minute, then mosey around and take a look at the project. You picked a good day. We are artists today. He settled the big square block in front of himself, picked up a wire, and sliced through the clay quickly. Then he placed the piece into a hand-powered roller. After cranking the wheel a few times, he took the slab over to a sheet of plaster drywall and laid it down gently. After slapping a pattern onto it, he had 2 tiles in the blink of an eye. That might not look difficult, Summer said, but getting the clay just the right thickness time and again takes practice, not to mention how much concentration it takes to do it quickly. She clapped him on the back and led Kelsey over to the next table where 4 women were seated. Each of them had an assortment of tools at hand, and each was working on a large tile, transferring an image onto the still wet clay. "The job we're doing is for 20 hand-painted tiles," Summer said. "We need a raven, a sparrow, a woodpecker, and an oriole, 5 times each. Camina, Fimi, Azucena, and Noelia are crafting those designs into the clay while it's still green." "Looks gray to me." "That means nearly wet," Summer said. She leaned over one of the women and murmured appreciatively, "Fantastic job, Camina. The raven's eye looks like it might blink." Camina turned slightly and smiled, her teeth blindingly white against her dark skin. When she spoke, a charming French accent came through. "Each one is a little better," she said, before looking down again. She seemed like she was embarrassed about admitting her work was good, but it really was. "They're beautiful," Kelsey said. "Did each of you create the image you're working from?" "With help," Camina said, casting her dark eyes at Summer. "I've been doing this longer," Summer said, "but no one needs much help. Just a little change in perspective or a highlight fleshed out a bit." She laughed. "It's honestly more that I can't stand not to have my hands on nearly everything." "She is a very good artist," Camina said soberly. "She teaches me so much." "Goes both ways," Summer said, giving her a gentle pat on the back. She led Kelsey over to another area where a thin, wiry guy was applying glaze to a rack full of tiles. "These will go into the kiln before we leave tonight," Summer said. "Armando is a masterful glazer, fast and precise." "How many kilns do you run?" "6 now, but I'm thinking about buying another. They're always cranking away." She fanned herself with a piece of cardboard. "That's why it's tropical in here, even on the coldest day. I save thousands on heating, but I get my punishment in the summer when I have to run industrial fans to keep us from passing out." Kelsey looked at her watch again. "I could honestly stay here all day, but I'd better get going." "Really? I was just going to launch into my lesson on how to make a good glaze. Consider yourself lucky." They started for the door, but Tuffy raced back to sniff the bottoms of Kelsey's shoes before Henry called him back. He turned and ran right back to his owner, with his long, spindly legs flying. "It hardly seems like a business in here," Kelsey said, turning to gaze at the space before they exited. "With the music playing and everyone chatting, it's like an art class." You wouldn't say that if you were sitting on a stool painting tile all day, but I'll agree that we get along well. That's probably because almost everyone is a referral." "Referral from other employees?" "Right. I've got a brother-sister combo, 2 sets of cousins, and 3 women from the same village in Burundi. People only refer good workers when they have to sit right next to them." That's probably true. But I'd have to say our company's a much better place to work since Junior retired. Sedlak is still in charge, but there isn't a younger generation itching for the older one to get out of the way. Now we've just got one boss, and his kids are young. I pray that I'm retired by the time they're poking their noses into things. Summer nodded. "I've got siblings, but none of them work here. The referral model only works if the people trust each other to pull their weight." They walked back to Summer's office, and as Kelsey picked up her coat, she said, "I would love to know more about your business. Would you like to—" She paused for just a moment, trying to create a little build-up. "Have a drink some evening?" "A drink, huh?" Summer placed her hands on her desk, peering at Kelsey until she started to feel comfortable. "Your business isn't tied to my agreeing, is it?" "Of course not." She could feel the color drain from her cheeks. "You're the only custom tile maker I have found who will even consider doing a job as small as mine. You could call me mean names and I'd still want to do business with you." Summer stood up tall and let out a laugh. "I'm truly teasing. Women aren't above being assholes, but you don't give off that vibe at all." Realizing she was dealing with someone who could turn the tables on you in an instant, Kelsey said, "It wouldn't be a good long-term strategy to try to screw around with you. I really need this tile." Summer picked up her phone, looking at Kelsey expectantly. "Let's have that drink. Name the date." "How about Friday?" "No, I'm usually busy on Fridays." "Are you free Saturday?" "I can be." "Then Saturday it is," she said, extending her hand for another shake. "I live in the Strip District. You?" "Shadyside, but I'm happy to come to you." "Great." She turned her phone around and handed it to Kelsey. "Add yourself to my contacts." "I can do that, but what if you forget my name?" Summer took the phone back and peered at the screen. "Smile for me." Then she turned the phone around, now showing Kelsey's contact card with her photo attached to it. "When you text me, I'll see your picture along with your info." She tapped at her temple. "I'm a visual person, so I've figured out how to make that work for me." She laughed a little. "But if I had to call you, I'd have to go through all my photos, which can be a big pain in the butt." "I'll text you when I'm getting ready to leave work on Saturday. Don't plan on happy hour. I'm usually stuck there until 7. She revealed a warm, guileless smile, one that made Kelsey hope the days went by quickly. If we're lucky, we'll have a very happy hour, no matter what time we meet.